Hello and welcome to this edition of Self-Reliant India. Today we take a look at the new policy guidelines for mapping and geospatial technology and their bearing on Atmanirbhar Bharat or a self-reliant India. Joining us as guests on the show are Dr. M. Raghavan, Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India, Dr. K Ramachandran, Consultant and former scientist and Head, National Centre for Earth Science Studies, and Ajendra Singh, Managing Director, ESRI India. A very warm welcome to all our guests, but first of all, let's talk about how yesterday a historic decision completely deregulated geospatial map making to unshackle the geospatial sector in India for the first time in over 7 decades. The reform will provide a huge impetus to Digital India and liberalize policies governing the acquisition and production of geospatial data. This will be a massive step in our vision for a self-reliant India. Here's more.
Data has been described as a driver of growth and change in the 21st century, much like oil was in the 20th century, with a global data economy expected to generate $13 trillion globally in the new economic activity by 2030, and it is expected geospatial data will play a big role in it. The Centre on Monday has taken a historic decision to completely deregulate geospatial map making and unshackle the geospatial sector in India for the first time in over 7 decades. Prime Minister Modi in a tweet said, the reforms will unlock tremendous opportunities for our country's startups, private sector, public sector and research institutions to drive innovations and build scalable solutions. This will also generate employment and accelerate economic growth. He added that farmers will also be benefited by leveraging the potential of geospatial and remote sensing data. Democratizing data will enable the rise of new technologies and platforms that will drive efficiencies in agriculture and allied sectors. Addressing a press conference, Union Minister for Science and Technology, Dr. Harshvardhan, unveiled the draft guidelines for the creation, acquisition, dissemination and use of geospatial data generated by various agencies, including maps for the country, so that the data can be made accessible.
We strongly feel that geospatial data is critical for success of modern industry, offering location-based services such as e-commerce, delivery and logistics, urban transport, and it is also essential for traditional sectors of economy.
Geospatial data is an integral part of the modern digital ecosystem and critical for unlocking economic, social and environmental opportunities for sustainable growth and development of the country. Dr. Ajendra Singh said that unshackling the geospatial sector would play a stimulating role for the space industry, as this sector is at the core of cutting-edge technologies like 5G.
Space technology and mapping would no longer be confined only as a tool to take care of the security areas, but also as a major tool for the development. We have now actually entered a phase or an era where space technology has virtually entered every Indian household in one way or the other.
There has been immense progress over the years in technology for the capture of geospatial data through ground-based survey techniques, photogrammetry using manned-unmanned aerial vehicles, terrestrial vehicle using mobile mapping system, LIDAR, radar, interferometry, satellite-based remote sensing, mobile phone sensors and other technologies. The availability of comprehensive, highly accurate and constantly updated representation of geospatial data will significantly benefit diverse sectors of the economy and will significantly boost innovation in the country and greatly enhance the preparedness of the country for emergency response. Mukesh Shukla's report for DD India.
And we go across first to Dr. M. Raghavan, Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences, who is joining us on Zoom. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Mr. Raghavan, take us through the vision behind the decision to deregulate geospatial mapping when these regulations have been in existence in India for 7 decades. There was a need constantly felt to deregulate the process, but why now? What would you say is the significance?
This is really a path-breaking action by the government of India. It is long awaited, and all industries, especially Indian industries, were waiting for this regulation to come, the new regulation to come. And as you know, that geospatial data has a lot of applications, and there are a lot of restrictions in the past. For example, we have for each and every data we need permissions to acquire, to use it. And for example, even Survey of India maps, to use it at very high resolution, we need special permissions for Survey of India. So a lot of restrictions. But the scope of availability of geospatial data without much restrictions will be very large because this has a lot of applications. For example, it has application on e-commerce, it has application on urban transport system, it has application on even in health, for example, health policies. And also, for example, mapping of natural resources, mapping of natural disasters, mapping of resources from the coastal waters, especially in the territorial water of India. This all has a lot of applications. So we need to, there was a need, really a need for reforms. And I'm very happy to see that Government of India has taken a bold step to make this reform. And also, I would like to mention that in November 2020, Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, also has come up with a policy for major reforms in remote satellite-based remote sensing data. And the new policy has come out, it is publicly available in the for comments. And so these are all new good initiatives, and I am very sure that it will boost our Indian industry. Many startups will come, many application tools will be developed for the country. And really a good initiative by the government of India. I appreciate that.
When we talk about accuracy of geospatial data, now that it has been deregulated and private players can enter the field, how much can we rely on the kind of maps that will be available? What basically are we talking about here when we talk about deregulation of geospatial mapping? Will such maps be available everywhere? Will anybody be able to make maps? What basically does it mean?
Actually, even though there are a lot of reforms have been made, but there are some restrictions. For example, there are some threshold values have been assigned for spatial accuracy. For example, spatial accuracy is 1 meter for horizontal and 3 meters for vertical or for elevation. And for vertical accuracy in bathymetric data, for example, below terrestrial waters, it's 10 meters up to 500 meters from the shoreline and 100 meters beyond that. So there are some threshold values, and still you can acquire data much more than the threshold values. For example, if you want to have a spatial data with an accuracy of more than 1 meter, for example, 50 centimeter, we can have it, but there are restrictions. There are some permissions may be required, and only Indian industry people are allowed to do that data. But no foreign agencies will be allowed to acquire the data below the threshold values. So these are some safeguards are required definitely, because it should not be also reforms are required, but at the same time some safeguards are required to assure that they are not misused. This data are not misused by some people. So these safeguards are required, and also there is a monitoring committee is being formed by the Department of Science and Technology. They will take the decision whether these thresholds can be changed, or thresholds some people can be allowed to collect the data below this threshold, etc. So it's a very foolproof system which has been brought out by the government of India.
Right. Well, we also have with us Ajendra Kumar, Managing Director of ESRI India. A very warm welcome to you as well, sir. We were just listening to Dr. M. Raghavan. He was explaining to us various aspects of the decision of the government. How does ESRI India look at this government decision?
ESRI India welcomes this decision by government. By announcing these guidelines, Government of India has taken care of or accepted the request that industry has been making for many years to remove so many restrictions that we had on the use of geospatial data in the country. ESRI India has been doing business in India for almost 3 decades now, and this has been a challenge that we were not able to collect and use data for our own purposes within the country. Now, by removing these restrictions and also bringing in things like self-certification and removing the requirements to obtain permission and licenses for many things, governments has simplified the process for using geospatial technologies in the country.
Right. Mr. Rajivan, again, coming to you. You just explained how it is a historical decision. We are also looking at it as a decision that will give a great impetus to digital India. Would you agree?
I agree with you. I agree with you. As you know, that Government of India is emphasizing on more on digitization of all the things, and Digital India is a very big theme for India to develop programs based on Digital India. And in many sectors, Digital India movement is really coming up, and a lot of new initiatives are coming up in many ministries. And so this Digital India is a good platform where good developments can be taken up, and good projects can be taken up, and new initiatives can be taken up. So I fully agree with that. This is in line with the Government of India's initiative on Digital India.
Right. Mr. Ajendra, when we talk about national infrastructure projects, they are very closely related to maps and accurate geospatial data. How far have they served infrastructure projects, and how do you feel that the deregulation of the policy guidelines for mapping on geospatial by geospatial data, how far will that change the scenario of infrastructure development?
Important issue that you have raised. While on one side in India we are trying to create a lot of new infrastructure, whether we talk about new roads and highways, or we talk about new airports, or we talk about smart cities. But with so many restrictions on geospatial data, often companies who are involved in implementation of these large projects were finding difficult to bring in the efficiencies in execution. So by let me give you an example that for any smart city project, it becomes very important to conduct survey so that a lot of information can be collected in terms of ground realities, and then the planning can be done about implementation of smart features in a city. Because there were controls on geospatial data, there were companies who were not able to conduct survey and collect the data. Because it's not possible to conduct the survey, there's a shortage of manpower to conduct the survey. So even so you know, this change in policy will actually have a rolling effect, which will start from creating more employment, creating more opportunities for people, making the data availability easier. And once geospatial technologies are used in infrastructure development, there will be a lot of saving in terms of time which is taken for implementation of such projects, and also saving of cost, because when the time is saved, the cost automatically gets saved, and a lot of efficiencies will come in terms of coordination and monitoring. I'll give you an example that geospatial technology can be used for monitoring the progress of many of these projects, infrastructure projects, whether it is construction of roads and highways or implementation of smart cities. This getting online data on a platform which can be seen, which can be shared between different departments, and also between government departments and private organizations who are involved in the project implementation, will go a long way in solving the infrastructure challenges of our country and for creating employment.
Yes. Mr. Rajivan, you just heard what Mr. Ajendra has said. How would you say the government is ensuring by these methods for time-saving techniques? What are the methods that that the government is going to employ in order to ensure that the data is absolutely accurate? Because infrastructure developers, builders, those who will be the stakeholders of the smart cities of the future will be relying on this geospatial data which will be made available to them, because on their part they are looking at it as time-saving device.
That is true. So see, once you talk about data, the accuracy comes to an important threshold, and more accuracy is always required. And I'm very sure this Geospatial Data Promotion Development Committee, which DST is now proposing, will ensure this whoever collect this data should be of high quality, and but above within the threshold which DST is proposing it. And for example, see, the data can be given at 1 meter resolution, even can be given at 10 centimeter resolution. Some people may need data of 10 centimeter resolution. Some people may need 1 meter. So the resolution may vary depending upon the requirement. But then the present proposal has a threshold. And so if somebody wants a data of 1 meter, and they should not expect an accuracy about 5 centimeter. So depending upon the requirement, the accuracy, the thresholds can be defined. And as I said earlier, DST has coming up with a kind of policy saying that these thresholds can be reviewed depending upon the requirement. So, but I fully agree that whatever data we use, the quality should be assured. That should be the primary aim of this data policy. And that's all. So the data policy, good data quality is more important than anything else. Because if you don't have a data quality, it cannot be really used for applications. It will be really a mess up if you really use the wrong data. So data quality should be assured. And I'm very sure this policy will really help to develop that kind of data quality protocols for the geospatial data.
Right. Joining us now on the show is Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. A very warm welcome to you, sir, as well. We are talking about your thoughts. We are talking about the thoughts of our guests. We have with us Dr. M. Rajivan, who is the Secretary in the Ministry of Earth Sciences. We are talking with Ajendra Kumar, who is Managing Director of ESRI India, representing business, representing infrastructure developments, developers, and so on. How each of you are looking at the government's policy decision in order to deregulate the mapping based on geospatial data. Your reactions, sir, Mr. Professor Raghavan, how do you look at it? How important is it? How important a decision was it? We are looking at it as historic. We are looking at it as a major game changer in the process of development. As a scientist, how do you look at the decision?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's very important to keep in mind that over the past few decades, at an increasing pace, technology has changed the way by which we capture data amazingly at very high resolution from outer space. Any satellite of any country to get detailed maps of any country. Our regulation, or the regulation of it, such that what is publicly available through other satellites, other agencies, which you cannot restrict, should not be restricted in our country. There's no point in doing that. With a certain resolution about what is available, there is a restriction. That restriction should be for Indian companies to dominate and to open up. So Indian companies can now to open up in the other areas of. So this is absolutely going to be transformative for agriculture, for health, for biodiversity, for industry, for infrastructure building, and so on.
Right. When we talk about agriculture, do you believe that in some way the strict regulations that were in place for nearly 7 decades now, as far as geospatial data mapping was concerned, do you feel that that was a major roadblock? Now the decision has been taken to ease those regulations to a great extent. Will that change agriculture? Will that change the lives of farmers, and to what extent? Professor Raghavan.
The earlier set of guidelines and multiple rounds and multiple kinds of clearances. In other words, it puts the onus on you to prove that what you're doing is okay, and agencies. Now the situation is inverted. You have a set of user guidelines. You have the requirement that you will self-certify, and the access is open. Ensure security from their own perspective and compliance from their own perspective. So this really makes it very easy. And let me tell you about agriculture. There are multiple ways by which you can map agriculture. One is from outer space, the other is by aircraft, the third is using drones, and the fourth is by ground truthing on the ground itself. All of this is necessary for us to understand where they have been planted, whether disease onset is early, and so on. So this can be truly transformative because it opens up industry and entrepreneurship to come into the sphere and work with farmers.
Right. Right. Dr. Rajivan.
Yes.
The government's view when it comes to agriculture and the new policy guidelines, well, those were the draft policy guidelines actually that were announced yesterday, if I understand correctly, the deregulation of geospatial mapping as far as agriculture is concerned from the point of view of the agriculturist. Can he, as a farmer, avail more information now? Can it be made available, for example, the way our scientific advisor to the Government of India, Professor Raghavan, explained? And
yes, definitely. Yes, I agree with him. And because with this new policy, probably we'll have more access for, especially farmers can have more access to the high resolution data, both the remote sensed as well as in situ data, for example, data taken from UAVs, drones, etc. And because as you know that the farmers need plenty of geospatial data for their farming operations, right from the data of sowing until the crop is cultivated completely. And so I can give a small story. And for example, 20 years back, satellite, with the INSAT satellite, we can derive the so-called normalized vegetation index. It's called NDVI, and which gives you an information about what is the status of crop at each place. Okay, and even you can derive the crop yield from this NDVI data. There were a lot of restrictions from ISRO side. I'm not blaming ISRO because that may be consistent with the policy at that time. And we had restrictions of collecting the data from ISRO and using it for agriculture purpose. Yes. But at the same time, maybe a better resolution NDVI data were made available by NASA and we used to get data from NOAA, institutions like NOAA, etc. So such kind of anomaly was existing. But this kind of situations now will be removed, and we will have more and more access of high resolution data. As I can give a lot of examples. For example, farmers will need data of weather parameters. Farmers will need data of soil moisture. Soil moisture is an important criteria for a decision for farmers. And for example, health of the soil, etc. So all this data, and now we are concentrating on this farming operation at village level. Forget about district level, block level, etc. For example, even crop yield at the block level, etc. So we need very high resolution data at this very high granular level to take this decision and also advise the farmers what they should do in the next few days. So I am very sure these reforms will really help all of us to help farmers to get more and more crop yield from their operations.
Yes, and the best methods, the best practices to be used as well. Well, coming to you, Mr. Ajendra, when we talk about business, how would construction companies benefit from the deregulation of this data? We've already got an idea of how farmers would benefit, how it was so difficult for the farming community, for the agricultural community to access much of the data because it had to be protected according to the policies that were available earlier, that were present earlier. What about construction? Because, well, we do know that like for farmers, it will also help them to understand weather conditions, other conditions of the soil and so on, save time and money as far as the groundwork is concerned. Also, we'd also like you to tell us something about how it can be actually implemented, because will construction companies abide by the policy guidelines? Will they abide by the data that is made available to them? Your comment on that as well. First of all, how would construction companies look at it?
Right. So I represent ESRI. We are not a construction company. We are a software, GIS software company, but we do work with a lot of construction companies who are involved in construction of, as I mentioned, roads and highways or dams or other large infrastructure projects. Now these construction companies, the biggest thing for them will be that data collection and utilization of geospatial data will become very easy for them. So when they have access to this data with less number of restrictions or without too many permissions and difficulties, obviously their productivity will improve. Now government has removed the control on up to 1 meter of data, which is quite okay for a lot of purposes. I mean, there are very few applications today that require data which is finer than 1 meter accuracy. So up to 1 meter, I think in infrastructure this is quite helpful. So this will help in planning the infrastructure along with highways, because that data will be available to them. So how the infrastructure can be created. This will help in land acquisition, removing the problems that exist for land acquisition or management of the land which is acquired. This will help in highway design. This will help in airport design. We talk about 3D data now. So when you build something, when you build a highway or an airport, you not only deal with 2D data, you also deal with 3-dimensional data. Now, restrictions are going from that. Also, government has prescribed certain vertical limitation under which the data is freely available. And I think the restriction for having even finer data are going to be less than what have been so far. So even if somebody requires better than 1 meter data or better than 3 meters vertical data, I think it will be possible to source that, and such data will be useful for higher accuracy in terms of 3D data when it comes to construction of buildings.
Yes.
So other question you said about will construction companies abide by the law? Yes. Why should they not? I mean, government makes their life easier. So when you make the life easier, it's obviously the compliance goes up. So people will be more careful. They will try to make use of the facility which has been given to them in a very honest manner. That's what my expectation is.
Right. Well, the significant restrictions that are to be lifted on the mapping industry, it extends to creation to dissemination of maps, requiring Indian companies to seek licenses, and the cumbersome system of pre-approvals and permissions. That will be done away with now. But we believe that it was hindering in Indian innovation in map technologies for decades. Would you agree, Mr. Ajendra?
Yeah, see, there are two parts to it. One is the technology, and second is how do you use that? To what application do you put those technologies to? I think this will ease out a lot in terms of using those technologies. There are multiple players. There are many international players also who have a significant presence in the country. Because when you are doing survey, you require certain instruments, and those instruments come from companies which are in different countries. Similarly, there are a lot of other software technologies and cloud service providers which are multinational companies. So in that area, I think there is some more work to be done, and there's more. In some cases, there's more acceptance required, because when you look at cloud technologies, many of these. I mean, of course, there are Indian cloud, but there are very prominent multinational companies who have that data, who host the data in the cloud systems. So the way the definition of Indian entity has been articulated in the guideline probably requires some more clarification in terms of how to give equal opportunity to companies who are actively participating in the Indian business community for the growth and development of the country, so that how they can still continue to play a meaningful role in this area. It'll go a long way in terms of implementation the implementation of various projects and building new applications while using the geospatial data.
Right. We are talking about the ease of doing business. Dr. Raghavan, coming to you. Do you believe that that the easing of the regulations, it will help and promote ease of doing business? Will India be more viable as an investment destination, and also for local enterprise to prosper?
Definitely yes. The answer is yes. And it will really prompt many people to Indian industries, especially startups, to come up with their industry aspirations, and they will develop a small industries. And because the data utilization will be very large, the scope of data availability and also utilization for developing some application, developing some tools, etc., is very large. So many Indian small scale industry people and also startups will come up with their proposals to set up this into the industry to make use of this geospatial data, which are much more freely available now with a little instruction, very little restrictions. So I am very sure it will help the Indian industry.
Well, regulations and checks will always be there. But we are talking here about the removal of unnecessary red tape that could completely crush the startup ecosystem that India is slowly and gradually building. How do you look at that? To what extent will this red tape, to what extent will the role of the government reduce? Will the government withdraw from it totally?
Of course, I am not an expert in this business issues. So, but what I understand is that the permissions required for example, especially from security angle, etc., will be much reduced. So then it will be much easier for an Indian entrepreneur to start a business in using geospatial data. That's what my thinking.
Right. And when we talk about the geospatial data that is available, we are talking about the removal of a lot of red tape or a lot of cumbersome approvals, permissions that have to be taken. We are basically here talking about government approvals and permissions because it was all in the hands of the government. We are talking here about more private players to enter it. To what extent will the government be a part of this process now? Will it be as strong as before, or will it withdraw in many aspects? What are those aspects that are being looked at?
Those details are not available to me, but my feeling is that government, of course, still government will have a say, and but most of the government approvals which are required otherwise for this industry to come up will be much reduced. So, but still government may have some say on how to use this data, etc.
Right. Professor Raghavan, coming to you. We believe that the decision is a historic one, and it has a very close connection boosting digital India. Would you agree?
Well, it has enormous potential for boosting digital India. You know, what has happened needs to be appreciated, that, as I said earlier, satellite information at high resolution is available for any satellite. And therefore, imposing restrictions on what can be got by any satellite is not of any point. And therefore now, with those restrictions gone, and for higher resolution data, which is not available commercially globally, there is a restriction that Indian companies will take the lead and will be driving this. So it certainly produces enormously, unlocks the potential for Indian entrepreneurship. I don't think that Indian entrepreneurship or startups will be a slow process. It will be a very rapid process. Now, in that situation, the layering analysis of the data becomes critical. Data is, of course, completely useless unless it's converted to information to knowledge, knowledge to decision-making, and linked to commerce or societal goods or the environment and so on. So that whole area of data analysis of geospatial data, including bathymetric data, gravity data, all of this, radar data, all of this will be extraordinarily valuable in analysis of what all we need to do. The whole industry of data analysis and decision-making links will also boom.
Right, sir. It's being said that the restrictions now will be more on attribution rather than the area of surveying, and the government's role would be to ensure that sensitive material does not get attributed in the maps. What do we understand from this?
Okay. Now, let us say that there is an area which is a sensitive area. Now, there is, by the very act of defining that area as sensitive, you are basically saying that this is a sensitive area. What the new guidelines do is tell you that you cannot put attributes which relate to sensitivity over there. In other words, supposing, let's say, in France or Germany or America, there is a location which, and I'm giving an external example so that it's easier for us to grasp. Supposing there's, a place which has got dangerous material or explosive material stored. You can say this is a location which is, stores material, let's say a petrochemical complex. But you cannot say which are the specific areas where explosives are stored and give those attributes. So the attributes will generally say petrochemical complex, but it will not detail out exactly what is stored where. So that is the level of security which will be needed for public structures. Now you can imagine for military structures, for industrial structures, other societal, other security structures, what the kinds of attribution will be. But basically, you will know the broad location, but you won't detail out at high resolution of what is going on inside.
So how will this, how will the necessity of maintaining our security, how will that be juxtaposed with the need to deregulate information, to deregulate data, to spread data, to make it available more and more? Well, at this point, we'll be coming back to that question, but we are joined by our guest, Dr. K Ramachandran, who is a consultant and former scientist and head National Center for Earth Science Studies. A very warm welcome to you, sir, as well. We will go back to Professor Raghavan. I asked you about how we juxtapose the need for security, because there will be terrestrial views, there will be terrestrial details about streets, terrestrial mobile street views and mapping and surveying of territorial waters. These were one of the reasons, because they had such sensitive data, that one of the reasons why the government restricted and had such strict policy guidelines about geospatial data mapping. How will this be continued? How will our security continue to be maintained?
I think we must distinguish between secure places, places which need security, and a mechanism which has blanket restrictions to protect those places. The analogy would be that, let us take our own homes. Now, from a satellite, you can get the map of where that location is. That, unfortunately or fortunately, you cannot do anything about. The satellite can do that. But you can have restrictions which you can impose as an owner of the home, saying that, entry to your home is restricted. You cannot come in and take photographs. You can say that I don't want a drone flying, at 3 feet above my house. Or you can say, for example, that I don't want any street view imagery to show where I am walking inside my house. So those are the kinds of restrictions in secure zones, whether it is your house or offices or elsewhere. Yes. Analogously, also, you can go to outside a government office and photograph it. There may be no restrictions, but you cannot go inside and photograph it. There may be restrictions. So those are the kinds of very simple aspects. Basically, to put it in one sentence, it puts the onus of security on you, the owner of the secure establishment, rather than putting a blanket restriction which puts the owner on the consumer, or onus on the consumer.
Right. Coming to you, Dr. K Ramachandran. Well, we've talked to everybody about, all our guests on the show, about their reactions. We are looking at it as a very historic decision, the decision to deregulate geospatial mapping. It's been taken after nearly 7 decades, a much needed reform. How do you look at it? Dr. Ramachandran, if you can hear me.
Revolution, rather this is one of the right steps that DST has taken, which we are waiting for long, and industries to a spatial thinking process with almost very limited restrictions. Research community is concerned, we have information as well as trying to put things on a spatial format for the people who are working on the disaster management. in fact, several state governments ask the information from people like us for the landslides, the areas that are likely to have landslide events, the flood events, and things like that. But we know that many agencies are trying to do parallelly many things, but it is not accessible to us. So this particular kind of liberalized geospatial policy will definitely make us or we will be getting more information from other institutions, whether it is government or private. So rather, I should tell that this should to government-funded service.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mr. Ajendra, we haven't heard from you for a long time. Very simple question related to your line of work itself. You're one of the participants in this entire process. Digital India and how it will be impacted at the grassroots level in terms of employment generation, in terms of jobs that will be created, in terms of the kind of tools that will be needed now and will be used. How do you look at it?
So as a industry participant, this is a dream come true policy guideline. The very basis of this guideline has been so simple that if there's an access available to a person or an organization outside of India, why it should not be available to the organizations within India? As Professor Vijay Raghavan also said, so that's a very basis of this policy, to simplify procedures and processes and remove a lot of controls. So it's a very extremely welcome move, and industry had expected. And industry had wished for this for a very long time. I had personally participated in some of the meetings earlier on this subject, and we were sort of advocating that we should have this kind of a policy environment in the country. And we always compare the geospatial industry with IT industry of the country. So if you go back a couple of decades ago, Indian IT industry was really very small. But look at today, we are global leader in terms of IT industry. This change in the policy environment can have similar impact on the geospatial industry for the country. Bringing us at the top of the global platform is a great change which government has provided, and the potential is so much that India can become a global power in terms of geospatial services and geospatial data production and utilization of that data for a variety of different applications. So having said that, there is an enormous potential in terms of job creation. Government's estimate, which was presented yesterday, talks about something like 20 lakh jobs, and it has a potential to generate 100,000 crores in terms of economic value, which is absolutely right, maybe even more, because geospatial data and geospatial technology has impact in every part of life. You look at logistics, you look at, today you order something, it's delivered through a map. You want to find a place, you use a map. So there's a huge amount of awareness which has come in public in terms of using mapping technology in day-to-day life, and the same awareness or same urge to utilize mapping in business organizations and some government organizations where the utilization is not very high will also come because of this simplification of the policy guideline. Of course, government organizations, a large number of government organizations have already been using mapping technologies, but there's been some restriction about sharing of data within from one department to the other. I think this will simplify, remove all those restrictions between government departments. The sharing of data will become extremely easy and open and free. And that is going to make a big difference for Digital India program, because that's all about governance. So when data is available to different departments, they can really move ahead in terms of providing better services to the citizens, go a long way in implementation of a lot of public policy programs and programs which are being implemented for betterment of citizens. So those are some of the impacts. So in terms of creation of jobs, in terms of supporting the startup community in the country, because this opens up floodgates for startup companies to use geospatial data, whether those companies are creating a technology or they are in the field of drones or agriculture. These are some of the popular areas where there are a number of startups we have seen. And by easing out and by removing the restrictions, government will make it easier for those companies to collect data, process data, build applications, and provide different kind of services to a variety of users across the country.
Right. We're talking about maps and accurate geospatial data, even as the government took the decision yesterday in order to deregulate the process of geospatial data mapping. Let's take a look at how maps and accurate data of this kind are important for. Maps and accurate geospatial data are crucial for national infrastructure projects such as linkages of rivers, creation of industrial corridors, deploying smart power systems for Digital India, for smart cities, e-commerce, autonomous drones, also for delivery, logistics and urban transport. Modern geospatial technologies require leap forward in mapping with greater depth, resolution and precision. In every economic endeavor, geospatial data is of crucial importance in activities like agriculture, finance, construction and mining. For local enterprise, small businesses and corporations, all alike stand to gain tremendously from the application of innovative technologies based on modern geospatial data technologies and mapping services. Previously, significant restrictions were there on the mapping industry, from creation to dissemination of maps. All that changes with the new policy guidelines. Here's how. Previously, there were significant restrictions binding the mapping industry, from the creation to the dissemination of maps. All that changes with the new policy guidelines announced on the 15th of February. This means freedom from having to seek licenses for companies. And there will be no more need to follow a cumbersome system of pre-approvals or permissions. No more unnecessary red tape for startups. All the roadblocks to Indian innovation in map technologies that have been there for decades have been cleared now. The Department of Science and Technology, by announcing sweeping changes to India's mapping policy, specifically for Indian companies, has made it possible for these technologies to work for an Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. Coming to you, Dr. K Ramachandran, when we talk about hand-holding on the part of the government, as far as initiation into the new system would be concerned, the freedom to use data, the usage of data, it would also become more mandatory, in terms of accountability of various big companies in order to ensure they use the correct data and they apply the usage of data now that it is available, now that the government has deregulated, so much is going to deregulate. So what kind of hand-holding do you see the government giving out to various entities?
Yeah, if you take the earlier restrictions, we were having, based on the policies, one agency produces the data and it is used only once. But now we will be having a shared responsibility. The effort will not go waste. If you take the present scenario, we have different kinds of standards, interoperability standards, quality of data, accountability of data, ownership of data and issues like that. So probably the Geospatial Data Promotion and Development Committee to be constituted by the DST will definitely look into this. And tomorrow we will have scalability of the data. In the sense, we have told what will be the accuracy in terms of the 1 meter data. But we have, for different purpose, we need to have different kinds of scalability. So towards this, we should have a policy, which data promotion development. As we go, at what scale, what kind of standards should be used. We have ISO standards for geospatial, data. So I think we need not parallelly process another. So we can use that and try to find that standard accurate data is being used.
Yes. Well, Dr. Rajivan, coming to you. We believe that the government will soon be forming an inter-ministerial geospatial data promotion and development committee to popularize the move and help entities. What kind of popularization are you looking at? Can we expect, or can entities expect, can companies and startups expect? Because here the role is to create a self-reliant India. So will you be having teams of, will the government be having teams of scientists in order to educate the masses, in order to educate those who would be interested?
Actually, that is a good move from DST, the committee called Geospatial Data Promotion and Development Committee. It will be very useful. Probably, I'm not sure about who are all the members in this committee, but I'm very sure that different science ministries who are all responsible for generating the geospatial data, and industry representatives should be there, and probably student community also should be there, because this data can be also used for the very different kind of research purposes in for example, developing many applications, etc. And so this committee should really consist of government representatives, industry representatives, students community, and so I'm very sure this committee also should have a role in propagating and also making more awareness about this availability of geospatial data and encouraging startups to come up, etc. So, and probably a kind of education program about what are the different kinds of geospatial data now available, what could be the utility of these data sets, etc. So probably a kind of awareness program also should be the mandate of this committee. So we should, not only reforms is not sufficient, probably we may have to inform people that this data are now available, and these are some of the applications which you can develop it. Now you develop it, we will help you. That kind of attitude this committee should have.
Right. Professor Raghavan, if you can hear me. As a scientist, what would you say the people of India need in order to ensure that this new historic decision actually means something? It makes a difference to how, to where our country is going on the path of a self-reliant India. Well, Professor Raghavan, if you can hear me. Well, we don't seem to be in contact with Professor Raghavan. Mr. Ajendra, as somebody who's involved with youngsters, as somebody who's involved with people in the business, what would you say is the need, to, what kind of awareness would you say is required?
Well, I think geospatial data and technologies are relevant in almost all the fields of economy. While I would say the usage of these have been higher on government side and not so much on the private side, but on private side, I think the biggest challenge has been the availability of data, and that's the reason why private companies and private enterprises have not used these technologies so much as the potential exists. Now, with easing out all these restrictions, the data availability to private enterprises, which are in the area of, say, manufacturing or financial services, or even banking and retail and distribution. So all these companies will have access to data. They'll be able to collect data. They'll be able to outsource the data collection activity to data collecting companies. And with all that data, they should be able to utilize this technology much more than what has happened so far. And that opens a very new, see, that will help us in making our industry more competitive. That will help our industry make better decisions. That will help our industry reduce the cost and doing better. See, these technologies, you require data sometimes, whether where do you want to set up a particular factory, or how do you want to distribute your product? How do you want to set up your retail operation? How do you compensate your farmers in case of loss of crops because of a natural calamity? So in all these areas, you need geospatial data. And by making geospatial data easily available, I think government has taken a very large step, which will eventually be a boon for the private sector as well.
Right. Well, we are running out of time. Thank you very much. Many thanks to all our guests for joining us on the show. Professor Raghavan, Dr. Rajivan, also Mr. K Ramachandran, as well as Mr. Ajendra Kumar. Many thanks for joining us. We were talking about the importance of maps and the government's decision to deregulate maps based on geospatial data to make them available and accessible. Well, that's all we have for you in this edition of Self-Reliant India. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.